Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Pathfinder Report. My name is Joel Gruey, and I am running point as your host today for a special two-part episode of the Pathfinder Report. With me today are two of my very good friends and board members of Project Pathfinder, and if you've been around Generation Joshua or me too long, you probably know them both. One of our guests is Jeremiah Lorrig mentioned. He is the vice chairman of our board, and he was my right hand for almost 2 decades of work at Generation Joshua, and now is overseas, no longer in the middle, closer to the end of getting his master's in international relations. The other guest is Cory Gibbons. She is the secretary of the board for Project Pathfinder. Jeremiah is a speaker, an educator, an international tour guide. If you really want to go see Europe, he is down for that adventure, as well as parts of Africa and the Middle East. He's developed expertise in international politics. He spent 18 years in service with Gen J, including serving as the director after me, took the lead on running projects, helped train over 30,000 people, specialized in coming up with creative approaches to teaching and strategic messaging, overseeing nonprofits, educational work, political work, etc. The other is Cory Gibbons, secretary of the board, as I mentioned, the director of marketing and communications for the Leadership Institute, a partner of ours. Originally from Flint, Michigan, we don't hold that against her. She moved to Northern Virginia in 2014 to pursue her bachelor's degree. While she was in school, she ended up interning for Jeremiah and me at Generation Joshua and worked on several different political campaigns, including now Senator Jim Banks from Indiana. After finishing her degree, she worked in marketing and communications for several different nonprofit organizations, including parentalrights.org and CareNet, before joining the Leadership Institute in 23. She holds an Associate of Applied Science in Dental Assisting, which is mildly terrifying, a Bachelor of Arts in History, which is slightly less terrifying, from Patrick Henry College, and a Master of Science in Marketing Project Management from Liberty. Outside of work, she enjoys reading fantasy novels, giving me recommendations about the novels I don't have time to read, traveling, baking, hiking, singing, opera, and a variety of other things. We were all co-workers for years at Generation Joshua, and it's a pleasure to have them both back here. So, welcome to the show. We're really glad you guys are here.
Super excited. This is going to be great.
It's going to be great. That said, we are setting this up in this recording in the shadow of America's 250th birthday. And we want to look at, this is the first of a 2-part series on America, its founding, its impact, what it means for history, etc. But we're going to start with kind of a big high-level question. I'll explain what we're going to do as we go forward.
Before, sorry, I'm not wanting to interrupt too much, but you're saying in the shadow of our 250-year anniversary. I would say in the glow of our 250-year anniversary.
Fine. How about the light of our 250th anniversary? There we go.
He's feeling the glow all the way from Europe because he just can't be here. So, he's just having to bask in the glow. We're in the shadow of the glow.
The 250 is a big thing, and it's coming in front of us, and it casts a long impact, okay? That said, when we zoom out to look at something with a 250-year window, okay, that's 2.5 centuries. What's the right way to even think about a nation's significance and its impact? Like, how do you measure that? How do you even evaluate that? Both of you have training as historians and looking at stuff. Like, how do you even start to look at that sort of impact?
I mean, the first thing that comes to mind is the headline in Politico today was America's 250-year anniversary is the biggest party and the most envied invitation in Brussels right now. So the reality is that it does have an impact around the world, and it's not just us happy Americans patriotic feeling. That there is a real meaning to America and our place in the world and our place in history. And I think that's part of why I'm excited to be here today with you two to talk about that.
Yeah, I just think, honestly, the cultural significance, if you're going to try to be what is a true mark of a nation or a true mark of any kind of civilization, is the cultural impact. So when I was in school, I wrote my senior thesis on Star Trek and classical mythology.
I remember that.
But the biggest thing I talked about, a lot of it, is the cultural impact of cultures and on fiction and on the ways in which we entertain ourselves. And a lot of a way in which America, on a macro level, we have so influenced the human race and human culture. It's kind of crazy. I feel maybe this is just the American in me, but I'm everyone's obsessed with us. Everyone.
For good or for ill. We've seen that at a global level recently, yes.
No, exactly. Like my roommate a couple weeks ago was legitimately watching like the British version of SNL, and pretty much every single skit had to do with America at some point. It was just kind of like either American politics or American culture. And she literally went to me and she was just like, "Are like we're not as obsessed with other cultures, are we?" I'm like, "No, it's because they're all obsessed about us." And so the idea being that like throughout, since I would say probably World War II, the world's kind of just been obsessed with us. So, like, I would
Makes
say
for an interesting reality to live in. That's true.
exactly.
Okay.
So the idea, yeah. So the thing is like the true mark of like a culture or a nation's impact, in my opinion, is like the way in which like culture in and of itself views it in a bad way or a good way.
To balance that a little bit, I would just say, like, I don't disagree with what Cory's saying about the systemic side of things, but I do think that the way to measure the importance of something is its impact on real people. And I think that if we're looking at America's place in history and we're looking at America's place in the world today, the question we need to ask is, how has it impacted real people living out their real lives? And I think that that's a big part of why people are paying attention culturally and politically all around the world, is they do have a real sense that what America says and what America does has real human impacts on their lives.
Yeah. All right. So let's run an experiment. I want to see if we can kind of unpack the impact that America's had on history and on the world around us, kind of by reverse, by pulling it out. Like, not what if America declines. There's plenty of people that want to talk about that as America's best days ahead of it or behind. There's plenty of people that's like, this is, it's getting bigger, it's getting worse, it's changing, whatever. They can have those questions. I'd like to have the question of, what if the American founding, the American experiment, as it were, had simply never happened? Like, we can do this a couple ways. Like, the revolution fails, or it just never gets started for one reason or the other. There is no United States of America. The American Republic never enters the scene. Like, what is the world without it? Like that's kind of like how I want to explore that. To start with on this, I want to throw the first question kind of on that to Cory. Most people think of 1776 as an American story, but historians argue the Declaration and what followed sent shockwaves far further than just across North America, but through every corner of the globe. There are ideas, I would think, that escape these shores that and have rippled across the world that probably wouldn't have happened, or likely wouldn't have happened, if the founding had failed. Like, what are those things that kind of had like ripples and impacts across the globe that kind of originate from that founding?
So I think there's like numerous examples of what probably would have happened if we never were around, whether like we lost the war, we never, entered the war in the first place for independence, or even if like, Christopher Columbus and the Vikings just never decided to like try to, come over here. Like, there's a lot of different options on what if history. That's why honestly it's so much fun. But I feel like at its core, some of the biggest ripple effects is like, if you think about it, the one that came right off the top of my head is the fact that like the French Revolution, what would have happened there? Like, it's very possible because they took a lot of the ideas, like when Jefferson went over to Paris and things like that, they took a lot of our ideas and were like, hey, we're going to try to implement it here. And it just went like kind of crazy. So in that regard, we probably would never have had like Napoleon or anything in the same way. Like, obviously it's what if, we don't know. You probably have it where if the British did take over and like we were still here, whether we didn't enter the war or they beat us, World War II probably would have been a drastically different scenario. The fact is like
we'll get to that, yes.
Oh yeah, we came to the rescue when it came to World War II. And the fact is like if the Germans came over, it would have been like man the high castle kind of situation. We may have all be speaking German right now, or a bunch of us probably wouldn't even be around. But the ideas of like democracy and these ideas of representative government that they like our founding fathers took from Rome. So if you guys don't know, I basically minored in classics at Patrick Henry College. So anytime I have an opportunity to speak about Rome or Greece, I'm gonna take it.
We're
So
there for you. Don't worry. Jeremiah and I are on board for this. Yes.
but like the idea being that like if the founding fathers didn't look back and be like, hey, this like representative government, this republic is a good idea, like the fundamentally understanding of like the government in the world, like world governments today would be like completely different. Because even now, like the monarchies in like Britain, it's a constitutional monarchy.
Right. Right.
Like
I was talking to someone in England last year, and they said one of the things that struck them as a novelty about us is that we have like one master governing document, a written constitution that was kind of a novelty prior to that. And you've seen country after country pick that up and take it. Not all of them have it, but many do. And that kind of got its first run in a big way here. Anyway, that said, Jeremiah, let's go to the most obvious historical inflection point of recent World War I and World War II. America had a massive impact on the course of those wars. The entry into both cases was rather decisive. In World War II, arguably the decisive factor. That doesn't necessarily go well if you don't have America showing up, let alone England and like the Battle of the Atlantic and getting supplies and all the rest of it. But you're in Belgium. You've been all traipsing all over Europe over the last year or so. Walk us through what you think Europe and the world looks like if the US isn't there to show up come World War I and II.
I think my one of the conversations I had earlier this school year was with Ambassador Walters. He was the Belgian ambassador to the United States, and what he said was America has transformed the world and has saved Europe from itself twice, and Europe can never and should never forget that. And that reality is something that is very visible here. When you like even the square right outside my window, you walk through, and probably about half the buildings that I would walk past right out here were burned down during World War I, when the Germans occupied this small city, and they strategically walked through and burned down each building, including the library, as a statement to the world. The atrocity of Leuven is in history books, but it's also in Anne of Green Gables, and that's the kind of thing that as my professor said, Europe needed saving. Belgium needed saving. Each of these communities, real people living there, were experiencing the rise of tyranny, fascism, this totalitarian approach to the world. And what it needed was freedom-loving boys from Tennessee and Oklahoma and California to show up and say, we're going to fight here on your beaches and your landing grounds, in your forests and on your mountains. And we're going to do it because the cause of freedom matters. I mean, Martin Luther King Jr. Said a threat to justice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. And I think kind of part of the American creed is that a threat to freedom anywhere is a threat everywhere, and we need to take that seriously, and that's what was lived out. And I think it's really remarkable that people freak out about the United States in a lot of ways, and they're like, oh, what about today? What about tomorrow? What about this or that? A lot of whatabouts, right? But the reality is, America rose to those challenges in the middle of times when they said, we're done with the world. America was isolationist. Both President Wilson and President Roosevelt, who were presidents during World War I and World War II, they literally ran on being isolationist and getting out of all these European issues and all that kind of stuff. But America's core values stood up and said, no, there's something worth fighting for here. And we did. And I think that that's something that a lot of people forget is no matter what our politicians do or say, at the end of the day, our values are still our values.
Fair enough. Cool. All right. Cory, let me switch over to you. Let's assume for the moment that without America entering the picture, the Allies still win World War II somehow. That is a very generous assumption because I'm not entirely sure how we get there. Let's just pretend it works. I don't know how.
Miracle.
Some miracle, etc. You still end up with some version of a post-war world, but you don't have an America, which became the anchor of kind of freedom on the Western side of the Cold War to contrast Soviet communism, right? Like we have that massive Cold War that expands, that happens, post World War II up until essentially the collapse of the USSR, the fall of the Berlin Wall, etc. Okay. If you don't have an America on the other side of kind of the communist bloc countries, does Soviet communism spread further? Did it spread because it was specifically feeling threatened by the US? You take that out, it doesn't go. Does it expand global and win? Walk us through what you think the impact of that not being there would have.
Yeah. So I think a lot of stuff, how should I say this? I think that the USSR may have continued to try to gain more land. However, because I took a class in college about like modern Russian history, and one of the things is like the way in which Russia maintains its safety is by continual expansion because it doesn't have any natural borders. So the idea being that why it continues expanding is because that's how you keep it safe. Is like if you're continually on the offensive, that's the defense. So a lot of the things that have been going on recently could theoretically in this purview fall under that of this is them trying to protect themselves by continual expansion. So the idea being that if we didn't have the United States as that buffer on the other side, I think they would have continued expanding into Europe, especially Germany, because at that point, they already controlled half of Germany. They could have easily taken over the rest of Berlin. I think Berlin, it would have been a slow march to take over the West. I think the easiest America replacement probably would have been Great Britain, but the problem is after World War II, they were completely a good chunk of their country was absolutely decimated by bombs. France, all of them were just their economy was not great. A lot of their men died. So you're dealing with these Western countries that are just limping along. And while I'm not saying that America didn't suffer casualties and didn't suffer anything, we were relatively unscathed compared to them. So the idea being that Russia, well, they also lost 20 million men or something along those lines. I think they would have pushed and they would have kept going. And I think if Great Britain did a complete 180 and was able to pick themselves up by their bootstraps, which England has been known to do, I think we would have had a scenario where we probably would have seen the USSR, Iron Curtain and the bloc, be a lot farther into Europe. I don't know if they would have taken over at all. They may have, but I think Great Britain would have been the last lighthouse of the West if America wasn't there. But again, that's hard to say without kind of that the fact that we had nuclear weapons and Russia also had nuclear weapons was also one of those things where it's okay, it's two people staring each other down going all right, I have something, you have something, you flinch, I flinch. And if Russia basically was able to come on the scene and be guess what, guys, I have this big scary weapon and none of y'all have this big scary weapon. That's also a possibility that they could have just been all right, cool, you're going to kneel down now because guess what? I can decimate your entire island in a day.
Right.
So It's pretty terrifying.
Jeremiah, you want to expand on that or dig into that further?
So the military and political, I'll let go for now. To me, the incredible thing about America post World War II is that on American freedom, prosperity and world starvation retreated. Prosperity advanced and starvation retreated. Mm-hmm. And when you look at the statistics of what American love of freedom, free trade, and innovation have all done to bring people out of abject poverty into the world that we're currently in, which still has poverty, but it's nothing like it was 30 years ago, 50 years ago, 100 years ago,
Right.
is incredible. The number of like one way to kind of understand this is to look at the idea of people living on less than $1 a day, adjusted for inflation. The number of people living on less than $1 a day 50 years ago compared to today is that is decimated. It is off the charts. No time in human history have we seen so many people benefit from such a small portion of the population. And it comes down to a couple things. Number one, American innovation, which revolutionized food production and also other things that produced wealth, and free trade, which meant that people could buy American food. And so American exports could travel all around the world quickly. And we had the resources to do that because we didn't have to make things that were being made elsewhere. We could buy them. And so instead we focused in on producing mountains of soybeans and, all the things that are produced in the parts of the country that people don't even think about.
Government cheese. Sorry.
There's that. I remember when I was working on Capitol Hill about 2 decades ago, I was working with the congressman I was serving for at the time on a bill that was designed to bring farmers from Africa to the Midwest, teach them how John Deere tractors work and combines and like massive agricultural production like we have there today, and be able to take it home and do it there so they could feed people and reduce. Literally, it was we're going to help build your economy and reduce starvation in your country. And if you want to come and learn how this works and the free market has that impact, we're happy to teach you. And they came, and it did wonders for that country. Not every country took advantage of it, but that country was in Africa suddenly had a leg up on the ones around them because they looked at American freedom and free trade and that agricultural innovation and said, we would love to learn from you. We can do amazing things. It worked really well.
And I would add to that there's the technological side and the kind of the free market side. There's also the generosity side. Because America is on the global scale filthy rich, because they have that, they have resources, and we could just and we are kind of a consumerist market, and we spend an awful lot on ourselves, but we're also one of the most generous countries in the world. And because of that generosity, a lot of people who are in areas that are still faced with abject poverty have a tremendous amount of, and I'm not even talking about government programs, I'm talking about private organizationals, programs that are designed for people in America to help real people in need in other countries. One of my favorites is Compassion International. Compassion International literally feeds and educates and gives spiritual nourishment to thousands and thousands of kids in poverty all around the developing world. And that is an incredible thing that you don't see happening in even other wealthy countries.
And you really don't see that in Russia or the USSR. So,
no, you don't.
No,
you don't. The American Constitution and its experiment in self-governance and limited government was genuinely novel. Not that the ideas hadn't already existed. We've had ideas of limited government for a long, long, long time. Enter Rome, right? Okay, and further back. But the way it worked out was probably the most robust implementation of that and the most thought-through implementation of it to that point in history. And it worked visibly for long enough that other nations around the world started to copy pieces of it. Without that proof of concept, the idea of a written constitution and limited self-government, limited government, etc., does representative democracy as kind of a global norm, I mean, the amount of countries that now have some sort of democratic function of government, does that develop the way it did? Or is that kind of dependent on the American proof of concept that comes out of the colonies and the revolution?
I think a lot of it is our proof of concept like just being honest, because we were the great experiment. So the idea being that, like, I think when we rolled up on the scene and we were like, hey guys, we're going to do this, I think honestly, and I don't know, I wasn't there, I think a lot of the nations of the world were like, okay, great. Well, you'll be crawling back to Great Britain in like 50 years. Good luck. See
You'll
you
be
later.
back. Yes, yes,
You'll
yes.
be back, to quote Hamilton. But I think it could have like spontaneously happened. I don't know. The thing is that's like the fun thing about what if history is you could have had it where someone like the French somehow came up with the idea and they were like, hey guys, you know what we're going to do? We're going to do this. But I think
then it has to stick, and that's harder for them. We've just discovered.
Exactly. But I think a lot of it is like we were the great experiment. So we were the ones that kind of came through and were like, hey, this actually works. And then people are like, oh, okay, cool. So I think like right before World War One, like during like the Spanish American War and things, I think people were kind of like, oh, maybe even like the Civil War. They're like, actually, the Civil War is a little bit tricky because people are probably like, oh, it's over now.
And here's the end of it. But then it wasn't, right? Yeah.
But
I mean, we know that happened in discussion with Britain. Right. Yeah,
exactly. So I think we were the proof of concept. I also think there's an important aspect to all of this with self-governance, is the fact that I think John Adams, and I cannot remember the quote, so I'm probably going to butcher it, but the idea of like the person has to be able to self-govern in order to have a self-governing government. So the idea being that like you just can't have like a angry horde of people self-governing. It just doesn't work that way. So the idea being that like, you kind of mind your own business, you have your own farm, like you live a quiet life, like, as Paul says, and like you kind of just govern yourself. And then if you're able to like control your passions, that's when a limited government actually works well. And I think that's something that America, when we first got founded, it was just like, all right, cool. We're a bunch of farmers. We, love God. We love our people. We love our land. And we're going to do this. And I think that's something that, the American spirit just kind of like forged through. Like the American dream is, to have a white picket fence and, was it 2.5 kids and a dog? And you're just kind of like, I want to live my great life by myself with my community and my family. And that's the kind of like lifeblood of all of that. And I think that's what the lifeblood of what the founders wanted us to do. And like, we can go back to Rome, the idea like the reason why the Greeks were able to overpower the Persians in the Battle of Thermopylae is because you have a bunch of very passionate individuals who are fighting for themselves and for their land and for their wives and for their children, as opposed to the Persians who are a bunch of slaves just fighting because overlord told them to. So the idea being that we're very passionate, we love our country and we love what we're doing, and we have this like self-governance there that a lot of people just did not have before we came along. It's like that American independence thing. American independence. But yeah.
No.
So
very much that. Cory, you mentioned just a minute ago, you kind of alluded to the aspect, the faith component, the religious freedom aspect that was kind of developed along with kind of our limited government, representative government. Jeremiah, the concept of I guess we talk about the term of separation of church and state, at least on the government side, as far as not picking a religion, but also maybe more importantly, the protection of religious liberty is deeply rooted in America, like in its origins at the very beginning. The idea has obviously older roots than that, but we saw protections going in for religious freedom like right at the beginning of America's founding, and it's worked its way out as it's gone forward. Of course, no idea is ever finished in that regard, but there's been a lot of global space and idea for the protection of religious freedoms and religious minorities, kind of at a global level. And I mean, honestly, the Christians, we have whole groups that would consider themselves persecuted that trace back to America's founding, and building a culture, kind of a nation where that was protected, etc. And as a result, the idea of religious freedom and that people should be protected to practice their faith as best they understand it, that has a presence on the global stage. Obviously not worked out in every country in the same way, and definitely in some countries not at all. But the idea that it's on the stage and is being debated, that at least you could argue has a significant kind of rooting in America and its founding. If you take America out of that, like what is religious freedom at a global level? And not to mention freedom of speech, which is intimately tied to that. What does that look like globally if you don't have the U.S. as that kind of like originating aspect to kind of working it out?
Well, I think you kind of answered your own question, but stepping back, The reality is 250 years ago, a miracle happened. And in the course of history, it is very rare that you have the convergence of circumstances like we had here in 1776. In America, you had not just John Adams, not just Thomas Jefferson, not just James Madison, not just Alexander Hamilton, not just George Washington, not just Ben Franklin, and the list goes on and on and on. What you had was all of them together. This is like, if you look at history, the Renaissance had like Michelangelo and Da Vinci and Raphael, in a moment, right? And that's why it's the Renaissance. It was a miracle because the geniuses all happened at the same time, and it exploded and changed the course of history. We have the same thing in Athens with Socrates, Plato, Aristotle. We see similar things with kind of the modern information age, with those inventors who have exploded our access to information. There are moments in history with these incredible flashpoints that literally change the course of all human events. And the one that happened 250 years ago was the miracle of 1776, where all of these minds came together and they bought into some core ideas. One of them, if men were angels, no government would be necessary.
But they're not.
Men are not angels, and neither is the government. And so because of that, a structure had to be built that assumed that the government isn't ever going to be perfect and an angel, and that the people are never going to be perfect and angelic. And that structure begins to pull on all these different things. We get Thomas Jefferson's contribution with these unalienable rights being life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. We have the model of the Virginia Bill of Rights, which becomes the foundation for the American Bill of Rights. And it says there are some fundamentals that need to be protected, religious liberty being key amongst those. And Adams says we need to have innocent until proven guilty beyond the shadow of a reasonable doubt, and that we need to not put our politics ahead of our core principles of justice. And all of these, and each founder is adding something to this thing that becomes a miracle, and it's because all of them together are transformative. And if we just had Jefferson, it would be like the France having Montesquieu. If we just had Washington, it would be like the Brits having Burke. Any one of them is important, but the fact that they all were together, and even the fact that they fought it out and they disagreed, produced something that changed the course of history. And that's what is the miracle of 1776, in my view.
All right. Well, that's well said. All right, let's jump from a look at what could have happened, would not have happened without it, to a little bit more of a forward analysis. Jeremiah, I'm gonna kind of go right back to you if you don't mind. You're living abroad. You're studying international relations right now. You have bounced all around the world. I think you've done most of the continents, barring, I think, Antarctica. I think that's the only one you haven't gotten to yet, if my memory serves right.
That is correct.
All right, cool. I'm not entirely wrong. You look at the major actors that are running around the globe today, like China, Russia, as Cory mentioned earlier, the regional powers, Iran. You've seen the impact of North Korea, South Korea, etc. International institutions, and we have all of that knowledge base, and there's a recognition that the U.S. or America seems to be, or is considering, changing its role on the global stage, which in a sense you kind of already alluded to with that idea of like this like isolationist tendency, and then principles come into play. If the U.S. steps back from its role in kind of global leadership, is there any sort of comparable entity that could step forward to be a force for both global stability, but also a force for global freedom? Or is that kind of a unique position that America is kind of the only one that can carry right now?
I mean, the reality is history is made up of people making decisions that are not expected. So could something like that happen? Sure. But if looking at the stage right now, I think the most likely player to step up in a leadership role, and they're already making moves, is the People's Republic of China. And we see that through their Belt and Road Initiative. We see this through their core principles and their advancements in the South China Sea, and their relationship without limits with Russia. They are intentionally increasing, in a very public way, their influence around the world. Also, if you're in the weeds like I am, you would see that China is starting to step into things that nobody's paying attention to, like standards organizations. And this is like the places that, define what a centimeter is and what an inch is, and what's the standard for global capacity measurements and all that kind of stuff. And China has, for decades, they've kept a low profile. They worked their way into these different international organizations and everything as kind of an observer. Under their new leadership, under the current administration, they have changed their policies, and now they are actively trying to set standards. They are actively stepping into those places, wanting to assume a leadership position. They're not necessarily challenging the United States and saying we're going to take the United States' place, but I think they are clearly setting themselves up that if the United States steps back, they are going to be ready to step up. And that's kind of the reality of international politics at this moment. Could others step in? I think Russia is too damaged by their current geopolitical mistakes to be able to step into that role. What they have is a mountain of nukes, but that's and that's not nothing. But it's not. It's not a global economy that everybody relies on.
Capacity to lead, right? Yeah.
Yeah. The EU, if they had the capacity to organize and restructure, like right now, I think the EU is functioning kind of like the Articles of Confederation, and right after the American Revolution, and so they're kind of at the moment where the founders had to decide: are we going to really lean into this and create something like the United States, or are we going to devolve powers back to the states? In the case, it'd be the nation states of Europe.
Sure.
And so I think they could theoretically step up, but that would take a actual leader on the scale of George Washington or Napoleon or Alexander the Great. It's not going to just happen by bureaucracy and paper pushing.
Right. And if China, and just to put a fine point on this, China stepping up into that position of leadership may provide some sort of order and stability, but it's not advancing freedom. That's not part of what it's going to be pushing there.
Yeah.
It'll be, if anything, the reverse of that. Let's just make sure that's on the record.
They would not be the champions of liberty and justice for all.
No, they would not. That's not how it works. Cory, I'm going to swivel over to you, and you've talked about this several times, so I think this makes for an obvious piece of that. America's influence, as you've said multiple times, was not just military economic. There was a major cultural and ideas, philosophical impact that America's had on the world. Like one of my college professors was like, when he goes, when I knew the Soviet Union was going down is when blue jeans and cheeseburgers are being sold in Moscow and McDonald's shows up there. Like there's this element of like, and people lined up for 3 hours to get a cheeseburger. And it's like, this is the power of American kind of cultural identity coming in. That's soft power in a sense. It's not guns, it's not nukes, it's not tanks and a navy. It's culture and the desire to be like or to know them in that regard. Is that soft power starting to erode? It sounds like you were implying earlier no, but let me ask the question straight up. And then as someone who thinks about messaging and communications, like how do you even measure soft power? How do you know when the US has it or not? How do you even know how to spend it?
Yeah, I'll reiterate what I said before. Everyone's obsessed with us. So like for one way or the other, they're either like, oh my gosh, we love America so much, or oh my gosh, we hate America so much. Like that's like I feel like the polarizing aspect of it, but they're still like talking about us nonstop for the most part, at least from my experience. And the idea being that like we can measure that cultural impact by like media and by like the, I like, honestly, I feel like this is a dumb measure, but things that people like make fun of or they're trying to be entertained by. It's like I know I already talked about this, but like the British SNL, like they're making
Right.
fun of us, they're talking about us, and like it's very obvious that we're a part of their culture. When I lived in Europe, like you literally went to anyone and they were like, "Oh, you're from America? What do you think of Donald Trump?" Like that legitimately was like the first thing out of their mouths. And because like they have a lot of opinions about Donald Trump and they have a lot of opinions about
Oh,
America.
yes.
And so the idea being that like we're leading in so much of this culture aspect of things. And I think also, Joel, you mentioned the cheeseburgers and the like blue jeans during like during the Cold War. Like one of my friends talked about, he was out in Ukraine with the Boy Scouts back in like the mid 90s. And he said he was trading blue jeans for stuff because that was such a like high commodity. He literally was like, yeah, I traded a pair of Levi Fly 501 jeans for a Russian uniform and a knife because they were like, this is so cool. So that's the kind of stuff I still think we have that today. I think there are other cultures that are kind of like, on the rise and still have a bunch of influence. Like honestly, like South Korea, there's a bunch of like the K-pop fever that's like taking over America. Like a bunch of my friends are really into it, and that's like a cool thing. But overall, like America is still kind of on top. You have all these people who are flying over here for the World Cup, and like I was watching like a TikTok video this morning of these people reacting to this European guy who came over to America and is here for the the World Cup, and he literally was just like, I have come to the Holy Land, and takes a picture of Taco Bell, and he's literally like, I'm so excited to be at Taco Bell. And then he's like, now I've made it to Buc-ee's, and it's literally like all these Europeans know about all these things, and then they come and they literally are like, this is the coolest thing I've ever seen in my life. And so they're even perpetuating that cultural coolness to everyone else because they're like, this is awesome. This is on a scale I've never seen before. And even like the meme culture of like, we're going to make fun of America. Like that's also just like a cultural aspect of everything. Like, I feel like Donald Trump and the current admin has kind of been perpetuating the meminess with their social medias, but that's a whole nother conversation for
Maybe a
whole
little,
other
yes.
But no, I don't think our cultural influence is going away at all. If anything, I think it's becoming more of a thing, but that's just my 2 cents.
The 250th, it is partly a celebration, but there's also a healthy place in the moment of that for realizing what we've got, why it matters, where it came from, and what we've inherited. And every generation inherits things they didn't build. Like that's the idea, and that's not it's not like some revelatory idea when you say it out loud. But for Americans, part of our inheritance isn't just the wealth, or even necessarily the freedoms, but the structure that built those, where it came from. I mean, the freedoms are definitely an element of that. But it's also an element of something that if we're not careful, we can lose those things that we were given because we didn't have to fight for them. At least the current generation hasn't had to fight in the same way other ones have. Maybe that's a more nuanced way to say that. And I think sometimes if we don't realize the cost and value of something, American influence, the freedoms and privileges that we're able to enjoy, that sometimes we give them away casually, or we let them kind of lie fallow, and we've never had to like live out the work of keeping and making those freedoms. So not making them, but like keeping them and protecting them. Like, how do we make the cost of those freedoms, the work that was paid to secure them, tangible to a generation that hasn't really had to work that hard to have them or keep them? They've just benefited from them.
Sure. Like for me, one of the things that is important is to realize that America's key heritage is that we're striving for, as the Constitution says, a more perfect union. And it's not done. It's never been perfect. There's always been room for growth. And so our heritage is not, oh, look, we had a perfect country and we're ruining it. Our heritage is we struggle in every generation to overcome the evil of our times. And sometimes, and it's, of course, it's more fun and easy to point to evil without, right? But it's also important for us to reflect and look at the evil within. And the rights and liberties that we have, we need to not take for granted. And I think we need to remember that we need to be a voice for the voiceless. I think of the unborn children that are legally aborted every single day across the United States. And when I think of that, my heart grieves. I think of how important it is for us to take that seriously and remember it's not all good all the time. But America's heritage and the heritage that we've inherited is to step up and take that challenge. Abraham Lincoln, in America's darkest days, literally issued the challenge in the Gettysburg Address. And he said, it is up for us, the living, to carry on with the work that these who have died here could no longer carry. And that's true of us. Abraham Lincoln, he called us and he said, we need to be a country that is defined by being of the people, by the people, and for the people. And that's a current challenge. And we need to make sure that we're standing up for those people, no matter what their age, no matter where they're from, no matter what their skin color. These things are inalienable rights, the right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And they were endowed by our Creator. God gave us these things. It's not our Constitution that gives us these things. It's not being American that gives us these things. Now, it is our responsibility to say, I'm going to heed the call of Lincoln. I'm going to follow in the path of John Adams. I'm going to live the legacy of 250 years of America striving for a more perfect union. And that, I think, is the thing to celebrate. It's not to say we're perfect. It's not to say we're better. It's not to say any of that. It's to say that we're a work in progress and we will never be done, because humans are always going to have problems. If men were angels, no government would be necessary. Men are not angels, and neither is government. So what we do is we find a tension that tries to work through that as best as we can, muddling through life, overcoming the challenges, and saying, because we're Americans, we are not going to back down from a challenge that threatens the world, us, the rights of others. We're going to stand up for the little guy, because real people matter and they're impacted by 250 years of American history, hopefully for good. And always, because we want to stand up for those who have no voice.
Yeah. And I was going to say, kind of to tack on to the end of that, like when it comes to, I think at the end of your question, it was just kind of like the American influence, like legible to people who have never lived without it. So the idea of like young people, or even myself, if I'm being honest, like I've never had to deal with a situation where our country was faced with possible extinction or anything like that. I think it's important for young people and just people in general just to have conversations with people from other cultures that aren't here, and be like, some of the immigrants that come here, just actually having a like genuine conversation to be like, all right, cool, what was it actually like over there? Because people like to complain about America all the time. They like to complain how terrible it is. Like I feel like on social media and all over the place, we just hear America is terrible, all these things are horrible. Like at least I hear that a lot. And I'm just being like, hey, why did you want to come here? Like, I'm genuinely curious. Why did you want to come here? And actually having those conversations with people. And like, I've had conversations with people who've left like terrible situations. Like, I just wanted a restart and I wanted freedom and I wanted hope. And actually hearing it from someone who wasn't born here and wasn't like, never experienced anything but that is, I think, so important. And also like on another level, I know not everyone has this opportunity, but like when I, lived overseas or I've gone overseas, like even having conversations with people about like what America is like, and they're just like, this is insane. Like that sounds so amazing. And they're like, I've never witnessed freedom like this before. And they're just like genuinely curious. And then you learn more about like why America is so special. Because you're like, oh, I'm so used to this because I see it every day. I get on the metro, I go to work, I get my coffee. I don't have to worry about like potentially dying like on my way to work or going home and not having food or clean water. And it's just these things that we take for granted, that if you have these conversations with people who come from other countries, they're like, no, like that's something you can take for granted. And that's why I love it here. So I think that's also just very important on like a personal level.
Absolutely. We're going to pick this up next time to look at some of the positive distinctives that that America's contributed, that were some of them both genuinely unique. There's some stuff that America's done that frankly was a first. But definitely some things that are worth celebrating, some of the impact that America's had for good at a global scale. And we've talked about some of this by the inverse this week. But last words from each of you. If you're sitting here, if someone's listening to this episode and they're going to be coming back in 2 weeks, is there a question or a thought you want them to dwell on or to think through in light of what's coming in 2 weeks and what the 4th of July and the 250th birthday kind of proper, as it were, coming up? If you were going to leave them with one question to turn over before we wrap this up, what would you leave them with?
One of the things that I love, so I was born in July, and I was due on the 4th of July, but I came late, so I missed sharing a birthday with our country. But I've always had birthdays with 4th of July. Cups and plates, and all the accoutrement of of our nation's birthday. And I love patriotism and the way that Americans can express their love for their country is so precious. And I hate that people out there have twisted good and healthy patriotism to be something vile and gross. And because of that, I think too many people, I think the temptation's real, is to say, oh, well, I'm not going to be patriotic. I'm going to retreat or whatever. No, don't react to the abuses of nationalism and the crazy stuff that can come out there with various forms of fascism, etc.
Yeah.
Don't react to that by saying I can't love my country. The truest form of patriotism is to love your country for the fullness of what it is, to see the goodness that's there and to see the darkness and try to improve it. To love your country is to see its flaws and to say, let's do better. If John Adams had said, oh, yep, it's just a mess, we can't do anything, and walked away, we wouldn't have the Declaration of Independence. But no, he loved his country and said, I'm going to try to fix it. I'm going to step in. I'm going to be involved. I'm going to invest. I'm going to serve on 150 committees or something like that during the Continental Congress. Like, the man was insane. And it was because he loved his country so much that he said, I'm going to step in. He saw the problems, he saw the difficulties, and said, I'm going to love and step in and make a difference. And I think that healthy patriotism is not whitewashing everything to make everything look perfect, but it's also not what's the opposite of whitewashing? Looking at everything through a dark lens and saying, everything's evil. That right. Neither of those are reality. To love something well is to see it for what it really is, and then to appreciate the beauty that's there and to try to correct the problems that are there. So when we step into the 4th of July, when we step into our love of country, really lean into that and say, I love my country, and that's a good thing.
Yeah, honestly, a quick little rebuttal, not rebuttal, I guess, comment. When I lived in Austria, I had a German friend, and I was talking to him about patriotism and just general, and he was just like, I'd love to be able to be patriotic, but in Germany, we're not allowed, because the only time we're actually allowed to be proud to be German is during the World Cup. And I was like, are you serious? And he's like, yeah, no, I'm being dead serious. It's like, that's the only time that we're proud to be German, because people are so afraid of what happened during World War II. We're not allowed to be patriotic at all. So yeah, it's crazy.
Jeremiah, you couldn't have set up some of what we do at Pathfinder better than that, because we do try and teach history as is and try to equip people to not only appreciate it and value it and be patriotic for their country, but also work to make it better as we go along at the same time. I love what we've got. And I thank you both for your time and kind of into this. I do very much appreciate both your expertise your willingness to serve on Pathfinder's board and helping guide and direct what we do. And it's a great blessing to be able to keep working with both of you. For those of you listening at home, if this is your first time listening or hearing about Project Pathfinder, you can learn more if you head over to projectpathfinder.net to find out more about our programs, our educational opportunities. You can find us on Instagram, LinkedIn, Facebook, and of course at Project Pathfinder HQ's YouTube channel. Like, rate, subscribe. We appreciate all of that, as well as, of course, you can find us on some of the other streaming platforms. We are coming back on July 1st with our part 2 of this. So we encourage you to tune in then, looking at some of the things that have made America both unique and I would argue great in its impact on the world around us and on us as individuals. So we hope to see you then. Subscribe to the Pathfinder Report wherever you're listening so you can catch future episodes. And we hope to see you all back here next time we continue walking down this path. Thank you so much and have a great night.